The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. "Sir, you'll need to move now. No ticket check, no explanation, just the icy authority of someone convinced they could decide who belonged in first class." Passengers glanced over some smirking others, avoiding his eyes. They didn't know the man standing his ground was no ordinary traveler. Beneath that calm exterior was the new majority owner of the very airline daring to humiliate him. And in less than an hour, this petty act of prejudice would trigger a financial earthquake so violent it would wipe $500 million off the company's value, starting with the downfall of everyone who thought he'd stay silent. At 6:48 a.m., JFK International Airport was already humming with polished chaos. Suitcases zipped like whispers across the marble floor. Designer heels clacked in practice precision, and the scent of overpriced espresso hung in the air like perfume. Derek Cole didn't rush. He never did. The man walked with the deliberate stillness of someone who already owned half the air in the terminal and was considering buying the other half. His steps, though, quiet, commanded attention, if not from people, then from the space around them. He wore a deep navy three-piece suit, crisp white shirt, and no tie, the top button undone with purpose. No flashy accessories, no security detail, no entourage, just the kind of unshakable presence that made people stop and wonder what they missed. In his left hand, he held a black leather duffel scuffed just enough to look real, not ornamental, and in his right, his first-class boarding pass, Atlantic Flight 332 to Zurich, Seat 1A. It had been a calculated decision, flying solo under the name D. Collins, keeping his true identity under apps. Derek wanted to observe his new acquisition from the inside before finalizing the final stage of his $500 million equity buyout. No fanfare, no boardroom optics, just raw, honest exposure. His instincts told him culture ran deeper than quarterly earnings, and this morning he was about to be proven right. As he approached the jet bridge, the gate agent barely glanced up. "Mr. Collins," she read from the pass. "First class. You're all set." Her tone was polite, but the subtext was neutral at best. He didn't match the default image in her head for a VIP passenger, and it showed. Derek smiled anyway and stepped aboard. The cabin was dimly lit, warm-toned, and tastefully luxurious, polished with panels, reflected soft golden light. The hush of exclusivity hung in the air, interrupted only by the occasional clink of crystal or the soft creak of leather. Derek moved toward the front of the cabin, toward his seat. But when he reached 1A, he stopped. Someone was already sitting there. A man, middle-aged white, perfectly at ease in an expensive charcoal suit and polished loafers, lounging like the seat was custom-built for him. He was sipping champagne and scrolling through emails like the aircraft belonged to his father. Derek checked his boarding pass again. 1A. He turned to the nearby flight attendant, a tall, cold, blonde woman whose name tag read, Natalie. "Excuse me," Derek said calmly. "I believe that's my seat." Natalie gave him a once-over subtle but surgical, and responded with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside for just a moment. We've had a last-minute change. That seat has been reassigned." Her tone was light but dismissive. She didn't check his ticket, didn't ask for his name, just assumed Derek didn't move. "I wasn't informed of any change." "That's my assigned seat, confirmed and paid in advance." Natalie shifted, lowering her voice as if to imply she was doing him a favor. "We had a priority request from one of our platinum partners. We're asking for your cooperation so we can begin boarding the other passengers." She gestured toward a seat in business class. 7C, still nice, still expensive, but not where he belonged. Derek's brow lifted slightly. "And who exactly made that request?" Natalie hesitated, then gestured discreetly toward the man in 1A, Mr. Brent Hargrove. "He's a legacy investor with the airline, very influential." Derek's face didn't change, but something in his eyes narrowed. Brent Hargrove. The name was familiar. A venture capitalist with a long track record of shady deals and a public scandal just 2 years ago when he was caught on a hot mic calling diversity hiring a PR stunt. And yet here he was, being prioritized without question, handed the best seat on the plane. Like it was a birthright, Natalie added almost proudly. Mr. Harrow flies this route weekly. He requested one asked specifically. Derek looked at her evenly, and that was enough to bump a confirmed passenger off their seat. She held his gaze for a second too long before offering a weak shrug. Sometimes we have to accommodate our most valued guests. The implication was clear. Derek wasn't one of them, at least not in their eyes. Passengers nearby had begun to glance over, sensing a disturbance. Some looked away, some stared. One man in 2C leaned to whisper something to his wife. Derek didn't raise his voice. Instead, he reached into his inner pocket and pulled out his phone. "I'd like to speak to the flight supervisor," he said. Natalie's smile vanished. "There's really no need to escalate, sir." "There is," Derek replied, dialing a number without breaking eye contact. Derek Cole remained still, his calm gaze fixed on the woman in front of him, as the silence stretched long enough for tension to harden around them like glass. Natalie, now subtly shifting from passive courtesy to professional command, leaned in, just slightly lowering her voice but sharpening her tone. "Mr. Collins," she said, her words clipped with performative politeness, "I'll need you to move to your reassigned seat so we can complete boarding." She still hadn't asked to see his ticket. She hadn't spoken to a supervisor. She hadn't verified the reassignment with him directly. She simply expected compliance, the kind that comes after years of subtle conditioning where people learn to choose peace over principle to avoid becoming a problem. But Derek wasn't built that way. He didn't move. His stance, though, relaxed, made something clear. He wasn't going to make this easy. Natalie glanced over her shoulder and nodded toward the jet bridge. Moments later, a second attendant appeared, this one younger, less certain, still carrying the hopeful energy of someone not yet jaded by the hierarchy. His name tag read Evan. Evan looked at Derek, then at Natalie, and seemed to hesitate. "Is there an issue with the manifest?" he asked, his voice just a shade above a whisper. Natalie didn't answer him directly. Instead, she stepped closer and said under her breath, "Not now, just observe." Derek heard it anyway, the kind of dismissal disguised as protocol. Evan shifted, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Around them, passengers in first class were watching with a new kind of attention. There was no more ambiguity, no misunderstanding. This wasn't about procedure anymore. This was personal. A woman in 3 leaned toward her husband and muttered, "He probably used points or something. They're stricter with upgrades now." Her husband replied without looking up from his tablet. "Looks like one of those startup guys trying to fake his way in." The words weren't loud, but they weren't hidden either. They were meant to land, and they did. Natalie, emboldened by Derek's silence, reached out with an open palm toward the aisle. "Sir, please, this isn't up for discussion." Her tone was firmer now, laced with a rehearsed authority that relied not on merit, but the assumption that rules always sided with her. Derek inhaled slowly. "So just be clear," he said, his voice level. "You're removing me from the seat I paid for without explanation, without verification, and placing me elsewhere to accommodate someone you deemed more important." Natalie hesitated, but before she could speak, Bren Hardrove turned slightly in his seat and chimed in without looking up. "Don't take it personally, pal. Sometimes we just have to know our place. This isn't about you." That line didn't need volume. It was dipped in condescension and carried on the confidence of someone who'd never had to prove he belonged anywhere. Derek looked at Brent, then slowly turned his eyes back to Natalie. She avoided his gaze. A small beep echoed through the cabin as another passenger scanned into first class, disrupting the moment. The distraction gave Natalie her opportunity. "I'm going to need you to move now, or we'll have to involve security," she said. She didn't blink. She didn't offer empathy. She gave him an ultimatum. And that was the breaking point. With a quiet exhale, Derek nodded, not in agreement, but in resolve. "Then go ahead," he said, his voice like flint. "Bring them." His refusal wasn't loud, but it stopped the air in the room like a dropped glass. Behind them, Evan took a half step forward, glancing from Natalie to Derek and then back again. He opened his mouth to speak, but Natalie cut him off with a sharp whisper. "This is not your place." "Evan, don't get involved." Evan's face reened. He looked down, then stepped back. A moment of conscience crushed by chain of command. Moments later, 2 uniformed ground agents boarded the aircraft and approached. Their eyes met Derek's, then flicked to Natalie for instruction. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Her silence handed them the verdict. "Sir," one of the men said, gesturing down the aisle. "Please come with us." Derek gave one final look around the cabin. Not a single passenger said a word. Not one voice questioned the injustice. Not one hand lifted in protest. Only eyes, some ashamed, some curious, some entertained, followed him as he picked up his bag and walked with the agents toward the back of the aircraft. His posture never broke. His chin stayed high, but he felt every stare like static against his spine. The humiliation was fresh, but it hadn't broken him. It had sharpened something dormant, something clinical and exact. As the engines began to hum and the plane started to taxi, Derek opened the Airline's in-flight magazine and pretended to read his ears. Instead, tuned to the movement behind the curtain, separating business and first class. 2 flight attendants stood in the galley near the curtain, Natalie and another male attendant he hadn't seen before. They spoke in hushed tones, not expecting anyone in economy to hear. Certainly not the man they just displaced. Natalie's voice cut through the hum of the cabin like a scalpel. "I know it wasn't ideal." She said, her tone defensive, but it was a direct instruction. "Brent requested the seat, and when someone like him makes a request, you don't second-guess it." The male attendant replied, his voice low and bitter. "You didn't even check the manifest." Natalie scoffed. "You saw him. Do you honestly think the company wants someone like that in one next to Brent or the board members?" The silence that followed was heavier than any turbulence. The words lodged like shrapnel under Derek's skin. "Someone like that." Derek's jaw tightened slightly. The way she said it, the casual way it spilled from her lips, wasn't just offensive, it was systemic. It wasn't a rogue moment of bias. It was procedure policy. A coded framework designed to seem neutral while executing prejudice with surgical precision. The male attendant lowered his voice further, but Derek caught fragments. Legal risk, public optics, justified reassignment. Natalie finished with, "Let's just get through the flight. If he complains, they'll bury it like last time." That was the moment Derek knew this wasn't personal. It was patterned. A calculated operation, hiding behind customer service smiles and automated protocols. But the second twist came not from crew, but from a quiet voice beside him. The elderly man in the aisle seat, white mid-70s conservative suit, airline loyalty pin on his lapel, had remained silent the entire time until now. Without looking away from the safety card in his hands, he said quietly, "They did the same thing to a young man last month." Derek didn't react immediately, but the man continued. "Sat him right next to me in first class. He was polite, quiet, had his boarding pass." 10 minutes later, a flight attendant came and moved him to coach. No explanation, just seat reassignment. I asked about it, and she said it was an upgrade error. He paused. Funny how those errors never happen the other way around. Derek turned, slightly studying the man's lined face. "What happened after that?" The man finally looked at him. His eyes were sharp, clear despite the ears, nothing he said. "That's the point." No one said a word. "And you know why, because everyone in that cabin was afraid of making it awkward, and awkward always loses to comfortable." Derek leaned back, slowly. "You work for them." The man shook his head. "I used to sit on their advisory board, stepped down 2 years ago. Too much silence. Not enough truth, but I remember your face now. Coal Industries. Right?" Derek gave no answer, but the man nodded knowingly. "Anyway, didn't expect to see you back here with the rest of us." The engines roared louder as the plane lifted from the ground. But Derek wasn't thinking about altitude. He was thinking about patterns, about what it meant for a company to not only tolerate injustice, but build it into their service flow, about how many of their procedures weren't accidents, but algorithms designed to camouflage old biases in new uniforms. He thought of Natalie not as an enemy, but as a function, repeating the script she'd been handed. Across the curtain, first class had returned to its rhythm of whispered conversations, muted clinks of glassware, and self-satisfied chuckles. But beneath that polished veneer, a slow unraveling had already begun. Derek could feel it in the air, the pressure building like static before storm. Then it came. A voice rose from beyond the curtain, too loud to be accidental. "I don't care how much he paid," Bren Hargrove said, clearly addressing someone nearby. "Sitting next to someone like that. Honestly, it ruins the entire feel of the cabin." His tone was amused, but laced with a venom that dared anyone to challenge him. It's supposed to be first class, not a charity auction. The words traveled effortlessly through the quiet, cutting into the soft atmosphere like a scalpel through silk. For a moment, the air went still. No one corrected him. No one called him out. Not the staff, not the other passengers. Silence once again became the accomplice. Derek didn't flinch, but his pen froze on the page. The man who'd once mused that diversity would dilute prestige had finally said it out loud in public, raw, unfiltered, and surrounded by comfort. Back in the galley, Natalie tapped her tablet nervously, pretending to review the beverage inventory, but in reality, her eyes darted toward her private message feed, where a new notification buzzed silently on screen. It was from Bryce Harmon, the onboard flight manager. The text was short, surgical and cold. "Keep first class clear. Let's maintain image. No racial mixing, too much attention this quarter already. Her." Throat tightened as she read it. The words were blunt but familiar. They mirrored policies and backroom murmurs she had encountered for years, rarely written down, always enforced. Now they were in writing, and her fingers hovered over the screen as if holding proof of something poisonous. She looked up and noticed Evan, the junior attendant, glancing in her direction again. He had heard Brent's comment, too. His mouth opened slightly, but Natalie cut him off with a sharp shake of the head. He looked down, ashamed his moment of courage crushed again by the unspoken rules. In row 12. Derek set his notebook aside and closed his eyes for a beat, letting the weight of what he'd heard settle like concrete. Brent's voice was still echoing in his mind. But more than that, it was Bryce's text that painted the full picture. It confirmed every suspicion, every coded policy, every subtle insult framed as protocol. The phrase "maintain image" wasn't just a preference. It was a strategy that dictated who deserved presence and who deserved to be removed for comfort's sake. His breath stayed slow, but a different fire now lit behind his eyes, controlled, quiet, but undeniable. He didn't need to make a scene. He needed to stay 5 steps ahead. This was no longer about a seat. It was about legacy and leverage. Meanwhile, at the front of the cabin, Brent reclined deeper into a seat, grinning smugly as he swirled the last of his champagne. "You'd think people would know their place by now," he said, voice thick with entitlement. "Money doesn't make you upper class. That comes with breeding." His words were directed at no one and everyone. A few passengers offered forced chuckles, the type that masked discomfort behind nervous agreement. Others said nothing. Their eyes locked forward, willing the conversation to end. But it didn't. Brent turned to the woman seated beside him. Another executive mid-50s, polished and severe, and whispered just loud enough to be heard, "Soon these flights will be indistinguishable from subways. Can't even protect first class anymore." She didn't reply. She only sipped her wine, her silence granting him license to continue. Farther back, a middle-aged black woman sitting 1 row behind Derek leaned forward slightly and whispered, "Did he really say that?" Derek nodded once quietly. "Yes," he said, "and that wasn't the worst of it." The woman exhaled slowly. "They don't even pretend anymore. They don't have to." Derek replied. The system protects them. He didn't speak with bitterness. He spoke with clarity, because now with every layer peeled back, the entire operation was visible for what it was. Not broken by accident, but engineered that way, about an invisible wall they would protect at all costs. As the flight pushed eastward over the Atlantic, the tension had settled not just on Derek's shoulders, but across the entire plane. Some passengers tried to drown it in noise-canceling headphones and hollow smiles. Others stole glances his way, pretending not to care while silently debating whether or not they should. The woman behind him had already whispered her disgust. Evan, the young attendant, had passed by twice each time, slowing near his row, before continuing on without speaking, and Derek knew why. The guilt in the boy's eyes said more than words ever could. About halfway through the flight, Bryce emerged from behind the curtain and made his way toward Derek with a purposeful stride and a face rehearsed for conflict. He crouched beside the seat. Like someone about to give bad news, they had no intention of fixing Mr. Collins. He began with a practice smile. I need a moment of your time. Derek gave a slight nod, offering no warmth, just awareness. We've had a report, Bryce continued, that you've been making some passengers uncomfortable. He said it like it was fact, like discomfort could be weaponized when needed. Derek's jaw flexed once, but his voice remained level. Is that so? What exactly did I do to cause discomfort? Bryce didn't blink. Your presence in economy after the seating issue has created a tense atmosphere. Some passengers have expressed concern over your behavior. You've been seen writing, whispering, questioning staff, and creating what they feel is a disruptive presence. Derek laughed softly under his breath, not out of amusement but in sheer disbelief. So you're saying I'm disruptive for sitting silently and writing in a notebook? Bryce didn't flinch. We've made the decision in the interest of overall safety and comfort to reroute the aircraft for a precautionary deplaning. We'll be landing in Shannon, Ireland within 30 minutes. The cabin didn't react at first, just a ripple of confusion as the announcement followed moments later over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a minor onboard disturbance, we will be making an unscheduled landing at Shannon Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Derek turned toward the window, face calm, but fire raging beneath. A man 2 rows back muttered, Are they actually kicking him off? His seatmate leaned in. Looks like it, Jesus. All that because of a seating mistake. It wasn't just a mistake. It was an escalation, a punishment, a warning. Evan passed again and stopped. He opened his mouth as if to say something, anything. But Bryce gave him a look that shut it down before it could begin. Derek stood when asked, gathered his notebook and coat, and walked silently toward the front of the cabin. As he moved, phones came out slowly, subtly like hands, unsure if they had the right to record what felt too unreal to be happening at $37,000 FT one passenger. A college-age woman sitting by the bulkhead didn't hesitate. She opened her camera app, hit record, and followed Derek's walk with her lens. They're making him get off the flight, she whispered. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten anyone. They moved him from first class, and now they're calling it a disturbance. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from disbelief. This is happening in real time, y'all. Within minutes, her live stream was reposted. It jumped from a few hundred viewers to 20,000, then 300,000, then 1 million. By the time the aircraft touched ground, hashtags flooded social media feeds. Directly Desher Flight 332 flying wildlack. The footage was raw, unedited, and damning. Derek walking calmly, being flanked by uniformed Irish security as he deplaned, his name still unknown to the world watching, but his story already echoing in headlines. Inside the terminal, Bryce made one final mistake. As Derek was escorted through a private side door, Bryce turned to the local agents and said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Better to deal with it now before he causes a scene." The Irish officer looked at Derek, then back at Bryce, and muttered, "He's the calmest one in the room, mate." Back inside the cabin of Flight 332, tension didn't dissipate with Derek's removal. It intensified. The passengers weren't calm. They were unsettled. What had looked like a seamless luxury experience now felt like a thin shell over something deeply unjust. Brent Hardrove reclined further into seat 1A, swirling a fresh pour of champagne in his glass, clearly emboldened by what had just happened. The smirk on his face stretched wider with every second the aircraft sat idle on the runway. He looked around, making no effort to lower his voice. "Honestly," he said loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, "the whole flight already feels lighter without that kind of tension on board. I didn't sign up to share this space with people who bring courtroom energy into a luxury environment." Several nearby passengers froze. A few glanced his way with discomfort but said nothing. Brent chuckled, then added with deliberate flair, "It's not about race, of course, it's about class. Some people just don't understand how to behave at this level." Evan, still working the aisle with visibly trembling hands, overheard every word. His discomfort was written across his face like a confession. He opened the galley curtain briefly, glancing toward Natalie, who stood there, arms folded, pretending to be focused on restocking the snack drawer. "Did you hear that?" he asked her quietly. Natalie didn't look up. "Don't get involved," she replied. "Just finish the service and keep moving." But Brent wasn't finished. As if intoxicated not by alcohol but by impunity, he lifted his glass and toasted no one in particular. "To the natural order of things, long may it last." At that precise moment, Derek's live stream, captured by the college student in 12A, hit 2 million views. The story had cracked open like lightning across the global timeline. Twitter threads, Reddit forums, TikTok stitches, art after hashtags, screamed across feeds, "A justice for Derek, arm VIP Wildlack, arm Flight 332. Shame." But Brent had no idea to him. The internet was just noise, irrelevant to those protected by wealth. Then something shifted as the ground crew finished refueling and rechecking cargo. The cabin lights blinked once, then steadied. A new voice crackled through the crew channel. A special communication relayed directly live to the flight manager. Bryce leaned into his earpiece, expressions slowly changing as he listened, his brow furrowed. Then he stood stiff and wordless, and walked briskly to the cockpit. Meanwhile, Natalie's phone vibrated sharply in her blazer pocket. She pulled it out, eyes scanning the screen. Her breath caught as the alert loaded, "Breaking Black executive removed from first class on Flight 332. Sources claim racial targeting." It wasn't just a trending topic. It was on the homepage of national news outlets. A photo of Derek standing calmly between two Irish security guards had become the story's face. Natalie's hands trembled slightly. She looked around the cabin, suddenly realizing that everything had changed, but Brent, still sipping his drink, remained blind to it. Moments later, the curtain parted and Derek reappeared. Calm, composed, not a wrinkle on his suit out of place. He stepped forward, not as a man returning to his seat, but as a force retaking the space that had wrongfully rejected him. A hush fell over the cabin. Brent's jaw slackened. Champagne glass paused halfway to his mouth. "You again?" he said, voice rising. "Weren't you escorted off?" Derek didn't answer immediately. He let silence stretch a few seconds longer than comfort allowed. Then he spoke, voice smooth and low. "You've mistaken quiet for weakness," he said, "but what you're doing here, what this company is allowing, won't disappear quietly. You're playing with fire." Brent laughed short and loud. "Fire," he said mockingly. "You think you have power here?" He turned to the others around him, scoffing. "Do you know who I am? I could buy and sell half the people in this cabin." A few passengers looked away. Some looked at Derek, but no one spoke. Derek reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a slim black card, the kind of card that didn't need a name to be respected. "You don't need to know who I am," he said, holding it between two fingers, just long enough for Bryce, Evan, and even Natalie to catch the unmistakable logo embossed in platinum. But Atlantic Air does. The air cracked like glass. Brent leaned forward, suddenly unsure. What is this?" he muttered. You think some corporate stunt is going to— This isn't a stunt, Derek cut in, voice like ice. It's a reckoning. Bryce, standing a few steps away, suddenly looked pale. Wait, Valta, he muttered under his breath. His eyes widened in delayed recognition, connecting the name to a headline he had skimmed just days ago. Valta acquires controlling stake in Atlantic Air. Derek let the moment stretch just long enough for everyone to absorb the shift, then calmly stepped past Brent and took the aisle phone from the wall beside the galley, punching in a direct line without hesitation. His voice dropped into the kind of tone used only when consequences were being set in motion. It's Cole, we're going live. Initiate the pullback clause, 7C, Zurich line, all aviation holdings, freeze the integration and trigger investor notifications now, and notify legal Atlantic Air just violated operational trust in breach of equity terms. He paused, listening for confirmation, then added coldly, they just tried to humiliate their new owner, Madeir. That won't go unanswered. Passengers stared, jaws slackened, while Brent shrank slightly into a seat, trying to scoff again, but failing to find breath. Natalie blinked rapidly, processing not just the situation but what it meant for her personally. Evan stood off to the side, frozen, watching everything unfold as if it were a corporate drama playing out in real time. But this wasn't fiction. It was power being realigned before their eyes. Derek hung up the phone and handed it back to the wall like he had just ordered room service. Then he turned to Bryce. You removed me from my seat, denied my identity, and endorsed racial hierarchy under company protocol. That's going to cost you more than your job. Bryce opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His headset crackled. He pressed the earpiece, listened, and his face drained further as the message came through. Urgent legal alert from corporate HQ marked high priority. Brent finally found his voice, though it trembled at the edges. What exactly are you saying? He asked. That this is some kind of revenge stunt. Derek turned to face him, fully stepping into Brent's eye line with precision. I'm saying the airline you think caters to you, he said. It belongs to me. Though Valta Capital owns 51% of Atlantic Air's voting shares, as of 2 days ago, I signed the final acquisition papers in Zurich. I kept my identity private to test the cultural temperature of this flight. Your flight, and you failed spectacularly. He turned toward Natalie. You didn't even ask for my name. You assumed I didn't belong. You moved me without due process, insulted me without knowing who I was, and enabled this man's racist tirade in front of your entire cabin. Natalie tried to steady her voice, but it cracked. I was just following the seat reassignment protocol. Derek cut her off. Your protocol is prejudice in disguise, and now it's documented, live-streamed, and linked to an executive shareholder lawsuit. From the front of the cabin, a chime echoed as the pilot stepped out of the cockpit. Captain Harris stern-faced in full uniform. He nodded at Derek with a look of guarded deference. Mr. Cole, he said, we've just been informed of your position and ownership. I'd like to apologize on behalf of the flight crew. Derek nodded but didn't soften. Apologies are a start. But the brand you represent is built on an illusion of luxury that's only extended to a chosen few. I'm here to dismantle that. Meanwhile, in offices from New York to London, investor alerts were going out in real time. Corporate legal teams were being flooded with calls. Directors were being looped in screens, lit up with push notifications. Atlantic Air faces internal crisis after owner removed from own cabin. News outlets raced to confirm Derek's identity, and within minutes, articles began populating the feeds. Black CEO removed from his own seat. Madeir sparks corporate earthquake. While the pilot retreated back to the cockpit to await further instruction, Derek calmly returned to his seat. Seat 1A, the place he had paid for, the place he had been unjustly denied. Passengers turned their eyes toward him, not with judgment, but with silent respect, even awe, as if realizing they had misread everything from the start. Meanwhile, Brent Hardrove sat, frozen, barely blinking. No longer the loudest voice in the room, no longer the dominant presence. He was now merely a symbol of the arrogance that had triggered a fall far greater than anyone could have imagined. Unbeknownst to those aboard, the real damage had already begun elsewhere. As Derek's command to initiate Clause 7C spread through Valta Capital's network, internal systems began liquidating Atlantic Air Holdings with surgical speed at exactly 11:41 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Financial terminals from London to New York lit up in red as automated trades executed across multiple markets. Brokers saw it first. Large volumes of shares dumping rapidly with no warning. By the time the bell in Frankfurt echoed its mid-session chime, Atlantic Air stock had plummeted 12% in under 90 seconds. For minutes later, it had dropped 27%. Market anchors scrambled. Analysts tried to make sense of it, but the full picture became clear only when Valta released a two-line statement due to an egregious violation of operational ethics and equity trust. Valta Capital has formally severed ties with Atlantic Air, effective immediately. Newsrooms move fast. By 11:49 a.m., the headline hit Bloomberg: CEO ejected from seat on own airline, $500 million in value, wiped in under 10 minutes. CNN followed with a banner that read, Corporate meltdown at 37,000 FT, racial profiling sparks financial catastrophe. Screens inside airport lounges flipped from sports highlights to urgent reports. CNBC aired the video captured by the college student looping Derek's removal from the plane next to a plunging stock ticker. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Nucker Coal Clapback, Ash Flight 332, and Arash Power Islands began trending globally. A tweet from activist investor Shah Laram summed up the sentiment: never underestimate a black man in a tailored suit, especially when he signs your paycheck. Inside Atlantic Air's Manhattan headquarters, panic erupted. Conference lines buzzed with crosstalk from legal teams, PR heads, and panicked board members demanding answers. Some tried to reach Derek directly. Calls went unanswered. Others attempted to freeze the market fallout. But it was too late. Valta had not only pulled its equity stake, it had canceled a multi-phase infrastructure project worth $280 million and revoked licensing agreements in 5 international hubs. That wasn't just capital, it was operational lifeblood. Back on the plane, Natalie had all but disappeared. Retreating to the galley where she sat on a steel storage crate, staring at her phone, watching her own face trend online in a viral thread titled, The Face of Corporate Disgrace. Evan stood at the end of the aisle, unsure if he should approach Derek, whose expression remained unreadable. Bryce, now pale and sweating, received a message on his tablet. He read it twice slowly before turning to face the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice noticeably shaken. We've received updated routing instructions. This aircraft will continue to Zurich without further delay. But no one applauded. No one clapped. The moment for pleasantries had passed. Brent tried to speak once, mumbling, there's got to be some misunderstanding here, but even he didn't believe it. Derek didn't look his way. Instead, he opened his notebook once more, added a final line, then closed it with precision. He wasn't gloating, he wasn't celebrating, he was calculating, because this wasn't about revenge, it was about restructuring, about dismantling something rotten so that something just might rise in its place. Across the aisle, the young woman who had streamed everything raised her voice just enough to be heard. For the record, she said, phone in hand, this is what accountability looks like. Bryce remained rooted near the front galley, his hands behind his back, attempting to compose himself as he received hourly legal updates through his headset. Natalie didn't return to first class. Her absence was no longer just procedural, it was protective. Every crew member on board now understood the gravity of what had unfolded, and those closest to the decisions were scrambling silently, trying to cushion themselves from a fallout. But the ripples had already become waves. As the plane began its descent toward Zurich, the cabin lights brightened, and the pilot announced their final approach with a tone notably more measured than usual, aware that any misstep would be recorded, uploaded, and broadcast within seconds. Derek Cole remained in 1A, composed, silent. a figure who had transformed from the problem passenger to the story's unchallenged center of power. His notebook was now stored away, his phone resting idle on the fold-down table, though it had already delivered its blow long before wheels would touch ground. In the terminal ahead, Atlantic Air executives and attorneys rushed to coordinate damage control, but none of them would be ready for what followed touchdown. The moment the aircraft rolled to a smooth stop at Zurich Airport, 3 suited men from the airline's legal division boarded without hesitation, escorted by local airport security. They didn't address the crew. They didn't look at Bryce. They walked straight to Brent Hargrove. "Mr. Hargrove," one of them said with a flat, rehearsed tone, "you are hereby notified that your privileges with Atlantic Air and its global partners are permanently revoked. Your travel history is being flagged across all GI-certified carriers for review. Your name is under formal audit." Brent's jaw opened, but he couldn't find a single coherent word. "You can collect your belongings and disembark now under supervision," the man added. A guard stood quietly behind him, hands at his sides. No aggression, just finality. Passengers turned. Some gasped. Others stared in stunned silence as Brent, the man who hours ago had bragged about owning the cabin, now stood trembling, flushed red and utterly silent as he gathered his jacket with clumsy hands and followed the escort out. His humiliation was not violent. It was clinical, corporate, and absolute. Bryce and Natalie were next. As passengers began filing out, 2 other internal affairs agents stepped aboard, flashing identification and asking both of them to remain on the aircraft for debrief. Natalie's face dropped as soon as she saw the badges. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She knew her career didn't end with one mistake. It ended because that mistake was the latest link in a chain of quiet abuses that, when brought to light by the wrong, or perhaps the exact right person, became undeniable. Bryce, still trying to hold on to his last thread of composure, asked, "Is this just standard review?" but received no response. The agents only handed over notice, immediate administrative suspension, pending formal investigation into discriminatory conduct, collusion to conceal protocol abuse, and failure to escalate procedural misconduct. By the time Derek disembarked, a small group had gathered outside the jet bridge. Not media, not fans, but staff. Airline personnel, from senior regional directors to airport partners, stood waiting in stiff suits and uneasy smiles. A woman stepped forward. Lena Caro, newly appointed Crisis VP for Atlantic Air. Her tone was steady, but every syllable trembled with the weight of optics. "Mr. Cole," she said on behalf of the company, "I want to offer our full apology and cooperation. We acknowledge the serious errors committed during this flight. An internal review has already begun, and those responsible have been removed from duty." Derek nodded, once said nothing, then walked past them with purpose, not pausing for the performance. He didn't need their contrition. He already had their attention and their control. Behind him, the rest of the passengers moved through customs and baggage claim, still murmuring about what they had witnessed. One of them, a retired lawyer from Brussels, was already drafting a column titled "The Day Power Boarded the Plane Last." Another, the student who had live-streamed the whole ordeal, now had over 8 million views and had received 3 offers from national news outlets to license her footage. In private terminals, CEOs took notes. Airline competitors held emergency calls, HR departments revised their protocols, and, back in New York, a dozen senior executives who had built Atlantic Air's old culture from the shadows found themselves under urgent review. In the days following Flight 332's chaotic descent into corporate and public reckoning, the aftershocks continued to ripple far beyond the terminal at Zurich Airport. What had begun as an act of quiet discrimination had now become a global case study in systemic failure, corporate arrogance, and unexpected justice. But beneath the headlines, the backlash, and the resignations, something else began to emerge, something slower, more human. It began not with the executives or the PR departments, but with Evan, the junior flight attendant, who had stood quietly through the flight, frozen between his conscience and his fear. 3 days after landing, Evan posted a handwritten open letter to social media. I should have spoken up. I knew it was wrong, but I stayed silent because I didn't know if my job would survive. That was cowardice, and I own it. The post gained traction, instantly not for drama, but for its sincerity. In the letter, Evban also announced the formation of a new initiative, the Crew Equity Fund, designed to provide legal and financial support to minority airline employees facing discrimination or retaliation in the workplace. What stunned most readers was a final line: "This fund is backed by my first 6-month salary, because silence is a cost, and I'm paying mine first." Derek Cole never responded directly to Evan's message, but he didn't need to. A private email from Volta's foundation team was quietly sent 2 hours after the post went live, offering to match his donation, tenfold. The moment was not framed as forgiveness. It was the beginning of reform. But the most unexpected transformation came from the man no one expected to change, Brent Hardrove. After his public firing and blacklisting from the airline industry, Brent lost more than prestige. He lost nearly everything. Shareholders pulled back from his funds. His board seats were revoked. His private clubs issued quiet but permanent bans. News outlets unearthed years of inflammatory quotes and recorded microaggressions that had once gone unnoticed. The man who once dismissed others for being beneath him now found himself alone at the top of a crumbling tower. 2 weeks after the incident, a blurry photograph surfaced on Reddit. Brent was seen standing outside a modest community center in Queens wearing jeans and a faded jacket, helping carry boxes inside. Most assumed it was an image taken to restore PR points, but that theory faltered when more pictures appeared unprompted, unfiltered, showing Brent sweeping floors, taking lunch shifts, and attending workshops alongside former inmates and community organizers. One local journalist followed the story and confirmed what few believed: Brent had begun volunteering full-time for Equal Footing, a nonprofit advocacy group focused on racial equity in transportation and public spaces. It was the same organization Derek had supported years earlier, albeit quietly. In a rare statement, Brent released a personal letter through Equal Footing's press office. It read in part, "I used to believe money defined value, that access defined identity. But being stripped of those illusions didn't ruin me. It revealed me I was wrong, not just on that plane, but in the life I lived before it. If there's a way back, I'll take it. Not to restore my image, but to restore my character." While public opinion remained divided, many noted the absence of deflection in Brent's words. He didn't blame the media. He didn't cry foul. He admitted what few men of his power ever do, that he had been part of the problem for far too long. Elsewhere, internal policies at Atlantic Air began shifting under Derek's influence. Hiring practices were overhauled. Anonymous reporting lines were installed for all crew. A full audit of customer facing decision-making was launched, with quarterly reviews tied directly to executive bonuses. But perhaps the most meaningful change was cultural pilots. Flight attendants and ground staff began speaking up, some for the first time in years, about what they had seen, what they had suffered, and what they hoped would never be repeated. Derek didn't hold press conferences. He didn't give self-congratulatory interviews. He simply continued to work, quietly, methodically. He pushed reform from the inside out, turning a personal insult into structural transformation. 1 month after flight, 3:32, a small ceremony was held in a private hangar in Newark. No cameras, no media, just 30 people, crew members, equity advocates, and airline reform partners. Evans stood at the podium briefly to introduce a new annual recognition named the Derek Cole Leadership Citation, honoring those who advance fairness within corporate culture through courage and integrity. Derek accepted it with a brief nod and a single sentence: "Power is proven not by how loudly you speak, but by what you choose to fix when no one is looking." The end. If this story moved, You don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another powerful narrative like this one. What part of the story hit you the hardest? Was it the injustice, the twist, or the redemption? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts.